Adapted version of Sudanese Tribes Confront Modern War by Karl Vick, Washington Post Foreign Service, July 7, 1999. Adapted by Greducator. They are the Dinka and the Nuer, the largest tribes in southern Sudan. Both greet the dawn by singing. Both live in square huts with round roofs. Both walk the land split by the White Nile River, and both honor their hump-backed cattle as symbols of wealth and power, as well as a link to the spiritual world. Dinka and Nuer have been stealing cattle from each other for as long as anyone can remember. Cattle raiding is an ancient tradition of farmers throughout East Africa. Cattle raiding is as natural here as a young man's desire for enough cows to pay the bride price for a wife. It is as normal as a neighbor striking at the intruders he sees using prime grazing land. In the past, if people died in these cattle raids, it was maybe 1, 2, or 3, said Chief Madut Aguer Adel. Also, the victims were almost always warriors, slain with spears. This changed in 1983, when a different conflict introduced firearms. In that year, Sudan was still all one country, but with different cultures in the north and south. The northern part of Sudan had many Arab and Muslim people, while the southern part had people who mostly followed traditional beliefs or Christianity. The government of Sudan in the capital city of Khartoum in northern Sudan imposed Islamic law on the entire country, including the parts that were not Muslim. Rebellious Southerners formed the Sudanese People's Liberation Army, and young Dinka and Nuer began carrying AK-47s. Until 1991, these guns were used mostly to fight against Northerners. But that August, there was a disagreement and a split in the rebel army of the South. The fault line was tribal. A Nuer rebel officer, Riek Machar, tried to take power from the Dinka commander, a man named John Garang. When this failed, the Nuer officer Riek Machar escaped with the soldiers who were loyal to him, who were also mostly Nuer. The war had entered a new phase. Southerners started killing each other. I used to be living here, said Peter Wakoich, a Nuer in Dinka land. The Dinka and Nuer were one. It all went bad overnight. Shortly after the rebel leaders split up, the man from the next hut stole all of Wakoich's cattle and slit the throats of 4 of his children. In the past, children, women, and the elderly were off limits during raids. Raids were traditional battles in which women waited at the edge of the fight to tend the wounded and retrieve lost spears, said Sharon Hutchinson, a University of Wisconsin anthropologist who lived in the region for most of a decade. Now there was no protection for children, women, and elderly. For example, 110 were killed in a village attack while its young men were gone and couldn't protect them. In the past, tradition in both tribes taught that causing a death created spiritual pollution. In Nuer culture, it was believed that if you speared a man to death, some of his blood was still in you. An earth priest had to bleed it out of your upper arm. To drink or eat before reaching the priest was to die. But that rule was for a death by spear, pressed into the victim by your own muscle and bone. What would be the rule about death by bullets? A gun's calves, as the word is translated from Nuer. rebel commanders argued to chiefs that a gun death carried no individual responsibility, that traditional belief did not apply in a government war. And the guerrillas came to see it the same way. They believe the ghost of the deceased will not haunt me because I did not kill with a spear, said Taylor Deng, an American educated Dinka judge. Once the fighters did not have to pay the traditional moral consequences of killing, it became easier to kill. Jock Madut Jock, an assistant professor of history at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, returned to his native Dinka land last summer to research the culture of violence. He found armed youths doing whatever they wanted in their society. It was similar to the violence and dysfunction in inner cities 8,000 miles away. Arguments once settled by fighting with sticks were now being decided with assault weapons. The warriors, Jock said, were simply too young to remember any power but the kind that came from a gun. The elders, however, could.